Back in 2009, the team behind the Clone Wars decided to bring in Deathwatch from the comics into the show, taking inspiration from one Tor Vizsla, main antagonist from Jango Fett open season, and turning him into a new antagonist for Obi-Wan Kenobi to fight, Pre-Vizsla. As Obi-Wan has a lightsaber, and everyone else was using blasters in the Clone Wars, the team decided to make him a more interesting antagonist for Obi-Wan to duel with, and they would give him a Vibro Sword, already a very common weapon in the expanded universe, and have this minor antagonist shock the audience by pulling up to a Jedi Master and General of the Republic with medieval weaponry and a jetpack. There was one issue with this though. George Lucas did not approve. In spite of the fact that he already did this 4 years prior, and had already reused this concept for the show they were currently working on, Lucas did not like the idea that a non-lightsaber weapon could combat a lightsaber. Therefore, Pre-Vizsla's Vibro Sword was erased from production and replaced with a new weapon. An archaic lightsaber from the Old Republic, with a crackling black core and white blade. The Darksaber has become very well known by fans in the past 15 years. Appearing throughout the Clone Wars, Son of Dathomir, Rebels, Forces of Destiny, The Mandalorian, and the Book of Boba Fett, this one-of-a-kind weapon has made itself a major part of the series. What has really captivated people though in recent years are the rules that come with it. Established first in Season 3, Episode 15 of Rebels, in an episode entitled Trials of the Darksaber, which released almost exactly 7 years after the release of the Mandalore plot, the Clone Wars episode that depicted the Darksaber for the first time, Mandalorian Fen Rao would give us the rules of the Darksaber for the first time. Those rules are as follows. Whoever holds the Darksaber is ruler of Mandalore. And to hold the Darksaber, you must defeat the previous holder of the Darksaber in combat. Like Excalibur, but with more blood. Now, something you may not know about me if you only know me from my YouTube, but I dabble a little bit into graphic design, and I've made a few Star Wars related infographics. Okay, I never said they were good-looking infographics. Shut up. What's important to pay attention to is this one. It's ugly as sin, but I spent a week on this, so you're gonna pay attention. Despite Fen Rao's simple rules, the Darksaber has gone through a very turbulent path, and those rules aren't always followed. So the question I and many others before me have asked is this. If the official path has not always followed the rules, who could the Darksaber have gone to? And by proxy, who is the true heir of Mandalore? But we'll get to all of that later. First up, it's... I also made this smaller infographic. We'll be looking at that first and just go through the straight official passage and no other bullshit I've slapped onto the side. The reason why we're doing this is because Fen Rao's rules in the Darksaber were a bit too simple, and they aren't rooted in any actual examples of the passage of the Darksaber. So we'll stick with Rao's rules for now, but as we move down this path, we'll add to these rules to find a more accurate rule set to figure out who the Darksaber actually belongs to. First up is Tar Vizsla, the creator of the Darksaber. He isn't actually important at all to anything we're going to be talking about as he didn't make the rules, so he's not as important, but I'd feel damned if I didn't bring him up at least once. After him, we've got the unknown Vizsla who took the Darksaber from the Jedi Temple and united Mandalore with it. Also, not all that important. The guy who made the rules anyway is probably whoever killed this guy. Moving forward about 1,000 years, we get to the real meat and bones of this. Pre-Vizsla. Leader of Deathwatch, usurper of the democratic pacifist New Mandalorian rule, tragic receding hairline victim, also a victim of the Darksaber, which is where we actually get to see our first on-screen passage of the weapon in a duel. This duel between Maul and Pre-Vizsla says a lot about the rules surrounding the transferring of the weapon. First of all is the fact that Maul kills Vizsla, and Vizsla accepts this, seeming to imply that you need to kill the previous owner to pass the blade, but this never comes up again. I don't think it'll ever come up again. Not even in like 10 minutes. It would be completely out of this world for it to ever come up again. One of the most important pieces of information this duel shows though is this line from Maul, where he claims that since Vizsla is a warrior, if Maul challenges him to one-on-one combat, he will accept. When Maul challenges him to a duel, before Vizsla even responds, the rest of Deathwatch immediately stops combat and looks towards Vizsla. This comes up again in Sabine's duel against Gar Saxon for the Darksaber, where Ezra attempts to join Sabine in the fight, but is stopped by Ursa Wren, who states that by Mandalorian custom, no one can interfere with the duel. This adds our first little extra rule to the chart: the sanctity of the duel. If two combatants are in a one-on-one duel where ownership of the Darksaber is at stake, no one can interfere with that duel. This next bit is just based on assumption, might be a little bit of a stretch. But since this is my video and I want to add some drama to the mix, if any active combatant in this duel breaks the sanctity of the duel by requesting that non-combatants join the fight before the fight is over, the person they are fighting wins ownership of the Darksaber. Anyway, Maul won the Darksaber from Vizsla. This creates a whole civil war and destabilizes Mandalore for decades, but that's not important. Maul eventually left the Darksaber at his home on Dathomir, which was later found and picked up by the long-dead spirit of a Night Sister who possessed Sabine Wren's body. This is the second type of Darksaber passing that comes up throughout the series: Finders Keepers. Ursa Wren makes this pretty clear in Rebels. This is a no-go. Even though Maul had just completely abandoned Mandalore and the Darksaber, you can't just be picking it up and treating it like you own it. However, there is a small stipulation to this we'll get to later. Ezra Bridger would defeat the Night Sister in combat pretty soon after she initially picked it up, but would somehow forget about it and drop it on the ground after using it briefly, later being found and picked up by Sabine. Again, not aligning with the rules. She would then gift the Darksaber to her mother after being told off for holding onto it, who would then gift it to Gar Saxon. Gifting the Darksaber is the third passage we're going to talk about, and it is 100% a bad thing in this rule set. Mandalorians do not like it when you try to gift a Darksaber. At least in the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian. If you tried that in Rebels, people would cheer for you. Pretty soon after receiving it, Gar Saxon would be defeated by Sabine in one-on-one combat. Which adds two extra stipulations to our rules. First of all you need to do to get the Darksaber is to win it in combat from someone who owns the Darksaber. The actual current holder of the Darksaber does not need to be a valid owner of the Darksaber, as seen with the fact that Gar Saxon hadn't won it in combat from Ursa Wren. That's honestly a pretty weird addition to make, but I guess it would explain what the Mandalorian's plan was if any current holder of the weapon happened to have a heart attack or something. This duel also adds that all you need to do to get the Darksaber is to end the fight and best them in combat. Killing your opponent is not necessary. This is really taken to the extreme when Sabine bests Saxon in combat without killing him, and Saxon is killed just seconds later by Sabine's mother, Ursa. Despite the fact that Ursa had won her fight against Saxon, and went as far as killing him while Sabine gave him mercy, the Darksaber still goes to Sabine, because she defeated him first. Speeding things up a bit, Sabine ends up gifting the saber to Bo-Katan Kryze, who ends up giving the saber to Moff Gideon, who is defeated in combat by Din Djarin. What's interesting about Din Djarin is that his fight against the cyborg mech completely redefines what combat means, as there wasn't a fight at all, nor was Djarin killed. The only thing that happened was that Djarin was put into a cage and incapacitated, and that's it. Later in the series, this was treated as a very legitimate passing of the Darksaber, despite the fact it wasn't really a fair duel, or even a duel at all. That would make just capturing the current owner of the Darksaber also a possible option to taking it. As a smaller implication, it also means that you don't need to know what the Darksaber is, or even have it in your possession to be a current holder of the Darksaber. Finally, just wrapping things up, Kryze would take the Darksaber from the cyborg mech in combat, and later, the Darksaber was destroyed in the hands of Moff Gideon in the Battle of Mandalore. Now, that's just the official passing of the Darksaber and where it actually went. But now that we have all these extra new specifications and rules with cases to back it up, we can actually figure out who the real owner of the Darksaber is. Bringing back the big infographic. First off, we're just gonna hit all the various little short offshoots that don't really go anywhere, starting from least interesting to most, because I make the rules. The least interesting little offshoot is Din Djarin getting the Darksaber slightly faster than he actually did. This is a controversial ruling that a lot of people aren't going to agree with, but I consider losing in ship combat to be a valid form of a duel that you can lose the Darksaber in. Din Djarin ended up winning the Darksaber from Moff Gideon in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, man on man. But he actually beat Gideon a whole season earlier in the Season 1 finale, where he destroyed his TIE fighter. Like I said, all this really does is give Djarin the Darksaber a couple weeks before he actually got it, but it's something. After that, we've got one of my favorite entries, an unnamed RX series pilot droid. Gifting the Darksaber, like I've mentioned before, is never seen as a good thing, but you are technically still considered a holder of the Darksaber that you can win rulership of Mandalore from if you're given it. Meaning, this random public transport droid requests all of Jaren's weapons, which Jaren obliges to, would technically mean that this luggage droid is the current ruler of Mandalore, although not a worthy heir. Personally, I think that all tragedies that Mandalore faces shouldn't be pinned on Bo-Katan, and should all be pinned on this guy from now on. These offshoots, as you can probably tell, all involve Sabine in some way. Again, moving from least interesting to most. First off, if you don't consider Sabine's gifting of the Darksaber to Bo-Katan or Ursa Wren as valid, then in both cases, the next time she would have been defeated in combat was at the hands of Shin Hati in Ahsoka. As, in December of 2025, she still hasn't lost since, the Darksaber goes to her, and she is the rightful heir of Mandalore on this path. However, that's only if you don't consider capturing as a valid form of passing the Darksaber, which we've seen it is. If you consider it as valid, then the first time Sabine would have been captured after taking the Darksaber was at the hands of Varys Hayden from Rebels, a really minor character who ran the Empire's excavation of the Lothal Jedi Temple. Following Hayden after that, really, the only conclusion I could reach here is that the Force itself killed him. I think the Force gets it. The Force itself is the ruler of Mandalore as it was always intended to be. You can also get this path if you accept Ezra as the rightful ruler of Mandalore after defeating the Night Sister in combat, don't accept his dropping of the Darksaber as valid, and follow who defeated him in combat next, which happens to be Sabine during training, which just brings you to the Force again. Speaking of that one training duel in combat, there's also one more minor offshoot where Kanan defeats Sabine in combat to get the Darksaber, and then Sabine beats Kanan right after. I don't even know why I added this one, it just goes nowhere. Moving on, now we gotta get to some of the bigger lines to tackle here that will actually take us to more legitimate claims to the rightful ruler of Mandalore. Starting off with the This is the path you take under the assumption that, like Maul's decapitation of Pre Vizsla, that you must kill the previous owner of the Darksaber to win the Darksaber. Obviously, the start is the same up to Maul and his murder of Vizsla. Then you get to Maul's death at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine after Maul's decade-long hunt to find him. With Obi-Wan, he gets to hold on to it for a couple months before he's killed by Darth Vader aboard the Death Star. From Darth Vader, you get to the first sticking point in this infographic, as Vader and Palpatine kill each other at the same time in the same fight. This is where some people have claimed that Luke would get the lightsaber as he's Vader's heir, but really, I think this still goes to Palpatine, as although both of them did die during the fight, Vader died forever, but Palpatine came back to life with the same spirit. Therefore, I think this goes to Palpatine here. From there, you run into the same exact issue again, but with Palpatine and Rey killing each other at the same time. But again, Palpatine, by December 2025, has stayed dead, while Rey came back to life. Meaning, I believe that if this was how the Darksaber worked, Rey Skywalker would become the rightful heir of Mandalore by the end of The Rise of Skywalker. But that's not actually how the Darksaber worked. And now, we'll conclude with the final three paths, each of which I believe are lineages that would find the rightful heir of Mandalore. First up, the This one starts at the very beginning. At a time few people I've seen have really called out unlike the next path we'll be following. This one beginning all the way at the start in Season 2, Episode 12 of the Clone Wars, The Mandalore Plot. The very first appearance of the Darksaber. When Pre Vizsla first shows off the Darksaber to Obi-Wan, the two get into a duel. But Obi-Wan starts to get the upper hand, and once he does, Vizsla violates the sanctity of the duel and asks his two soldiers to fight for him. This completely violates the ancient Mandalorian way, and I believe grants Obi-Wan the Darksaber. Now the Darksaber has just been given to a main character of the Clone Wars at the very start of the Clone Wars. So this is going to get very complicated very quickly. From Kenobi, the first passage is another controversial ruling that I've made that I know a lot of people won't like. But during the Battle of Kamino, Obi-Wan Kenobi and General Grievous get into a duel. This duel eventually comes to a close, but that close is the collapsing of the building the two were standing on. Grievous manages to get into his ship and escape by himself. However, Kenobi fell off the building, and to his inevitable death, if not for an Awa picking him up and saving his life, therefore saving him through outside interference. You could argue that the collapsing building in the first place was also outside interference, but that's the way I'm straining this. General Grievous is the real heir of Mandalore. After him, we've got yet another controversial ruling, General Grievous and Asajj Ventress's duel on Dathomir. A duel that, just like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Pre Vizsla's duel, ended with Ventress getting the upper hand, and Grievous violating the sanctity of the duel by sending his troops onto Ventress. After that encounter is a much easier to take in one. While helping Ahsoka Tano try to avoid Republic arrest, Ventress and Tano separated, and when left alone, Ventress was knocked out by Barriss Offee and robbed. Only a few hours after her is Anakin Skywalker, who confronted Barriss after suspecting that she was the one responsible for the bombing of the Jedi Temple and pinning it on Tano. Only a few weeks after this is, you guessed it, another controversial ruling, this being Anakin's duel with Count Dooku on Obadiah. Again, very similar to Obi-Wan and Grievous' duel on Kamino, the battle ends with Dooku escaping on his ship, while Skywalker is left in a position where he could have died if not for outside interference. This time, the position being hanging onto the side of a crashing ship. If you don't like that, you don't need to worry too much though, as only a couple weeks later, the Battle of Coruscant begins, and on a mission to save Chancellor Palpatine from the Invisible Hand, Skywalker would meet and confront Dooku again, ending with Dooku's head on the ground. But even that would be a short-lived victory, as Skywalker would soon be captured by General Grievous with a ray shield aboard the hand, adding a third fine addition to Grievous's collection that he isn't even aware he owns. And even that is a short-lived victory, as only a few days later, Grievous would be confronted on Utapau by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who would shoot half a dozen shots into Grievous's corpse, causing him to explode, leaving behind a charred corpse for me to attempt to sell in a previous video. Please go watch it after this, I am desperate. That was an incredibly busy 19 BBY. More so than usual. A total of 6 passes over the course of a few months. Exciting stuff. Now, we get into a long period of stability, where Obi-Wan defeats the newly christened Darth Vader, flees to Tatooine, and lives out his life, free of danger and noise, for 10 long years. That is until Bail Organa shows up at his door and asks that he saves his daughter from the Empire. Long story short, this did not go well, and somehow, again, the Darksaber would end up in the hands of Darth Vader after burning Obi-Wan alive on Mapuzo. But don't worry, that does not last long, as only a few days later, Obi-Wan defeats Vader again on an unknown world with a bunch of rocks, takes back the Darksaber, the only reason he was in that fight of course, and returns back to Tatooine for another 9 long years of solitude and relaxation. That is until Leia Organa shows up at his door and asks that he stop the Empire. Big spoiler warning for people watching this video who have for some reason never seen the first Star Wars film, but this did not go well for Obi-Wan. And for the 4th time on this list, Darth Vader receives the Darksaber back from Obi-Wan after bisecting him. Only a few hours later though, while flying above the Death Star, Darth Vader's TIE fighter would be shot out of the battlefield and disabled by none other than Han Solo. This will probably be the most controversial ruling, but I think Han gets this. Ships are really just extensions of people like weapons are, and it's already been shown in the Cyborg Mech Pass that you don't need to know that you're endangered for the pass to be valid, so why shouldn't Han get it? Han Solo, poor criminal from Corellia with nothing but a Glock and a warrant to his name, is the rightful heir to Mandalore. Except not for long, because a new, final challenger will take that throne from him. A dame. You know a dame, right? That one character who showed up in a total of 12 panels in the comic Han Solo issue 1? That guy. Anyway, he and a woman named Silentia, both soldiers for the Rebel Alliance, had captured Han shortly after the events of A New Hope. And as a dame did the capturing, he gets the Darksaber. And as he's never appeared in any other media ever again, he gets the Darksaber. Good on you, Adame. you're the true heir of Mandalore. As long as you follow that path, and not the other two paths I have in store, both of them being the path. This is one of the biggest examples people think of when they think about people who should have gotten the Darksaber, but didn't. Ignoring Vizsla's whole thing with Obi-Wan and moving down the mall, the first time he was defeated in combat was pretty soon after getting the Darksaber, getting his ass kicked by Palpatine in a 2v1 for the ages. Despite the fact that Palpatine had rightfully won ownership of the Darksaber from Maul, he chose not to take it from him, and left it wherever it had dropped in the duel, likely not to occur any more suspicion he had on himself than he already did. From there, if you follow this from a combat lens, the next time he was defeated was at the hands of Mace Windu, and soon after that, we have the biggest stretch yet as to who gets the Darksaber. Windu getting the Darksaber in this moment is a pretty big issue, as he dies right after, and it isn't super clear how this interaction would work with the Darksaber in mind. Windu holds Palpatine at lightsaber point, and as he does, his hand is cut off by Anakin Skywalker. While shouting in pain, he is shocked by Palpatine and thrown out the window, killing him. By all means, this seems to be a 2v1 against the Darksaber holder, and thus would nullify who gets it. But that's not very dramatic. I like a better finale, so despite my better judgment, I gave this to Anakin. Yet again. Windu didn't really get the opportunity to fight back, but Anakin did technically stop Windu from what he was doing with the lightsaber, which is sort of a defeat through combat. I know you don't like this. I don't like it either. Let's just move on. Who gets it after Anakin? Okay. It seems like, that would be Obi-Wan. Then Vader. Then Obi-Wan. Then Vader. Then Han. Then, Adame. Adame gets the Darksaber once again. Okay, good on you, man. Twice in a row. We got two other possibilities to get to, so let's just ignore that for now. After Palpatine defeated Maul in combat, he chose not to pick up the Darksaber, and instead imprisoned just Maul. This abandoning of the Darksaber procced the Finders Keepers rule, as an unknown Mandalorian had picked the Darksaber up from the battlefield. Doubling up on bad news, this Mandalorian would then gift the Darksaber to this unnamed Mandalorian, who appeared in Son of Dathomir. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Who killed this guy? The guy who killed this guy was General Grievous, who was then killed by Obi-Wan, then Vader, then Obi-Wan, then Vader, then Han, then Adame. So we're skipping over the unnamed Mandalorian. Anyway, it doesn't matter, he gave it to Maul. Now, Maul you think we've already covered, but this is technically a different occurrence of him getting the Darksaber, and therefore he would have a different opponent who defeated him. Let's just see who ended up doing that. It's Ahsoka. Ahsoka Tano defeated Maul in combat above Mandalore after Maul had tried to convince her to join him and to stop the Empire. That's great! We're on a different path now. We've separated. Let's see, who defeated Ahsoka next? Okay. It was, not here. It was in Rebels. It was Vader. And then it was Han. Then Adame. It's always Adame. It always will be Adame. The true heir of Mandalore. The righteous owner of all that is holy. Weep, weep ye sons and daughters. Gaze upon the true ruler of Mandalore. A true king amongst kings. By the Father, by the Son, by the Holy Spirit, we have our hero. A hero of ages. A hero of all time. A man forgotten by the masses, but not by us. Us truly blessed folk. Arise! A dame! Arise! A dame! Arise!